looking at. Oh,
I forgot to put it on.
don't worry, I forgot to say that we're recording it, but we'll turn it off when it comes to questions, so that people feel comfortable to just say whatever they want to. So I'll just start from the top of that paragraph again. The broad span of the book ranges from introducing practices for the novice to looking at spiritualism and the possible life beyond this realm. I've divided it into 4 parts, so that the first part, the first 3 chapters, are quite personal, looking at spirituality itself, how it may be accessed, practiced, and experienced, as well as how it manifests in nature and ecology, looking at our responsibilities to this precious planet. So part 1 sets the scene with an overview of the spiritual perspective at the heart of the work. Then in the second part, I look at dilemmas we encounter in life, covering deep questions around the purpose of life and existence, and how we intuitively know. In that section, we look at some vital components of a spiritual perspective, as well as addressing some of the deepest questions in life. In part 3, I saw as like puzzles, such as predestination, destiny and fate, synchronicity, and I look at 3 mantic practices, divinatory practices, tarot, I Ching, and astrology, each of which is linked to synchronicity and grace. In the last part, part 4, I look at what I've called the ineffable. In that section, we look at some of the most challenging matters we may ever face. Questions of the limits of existence, phantoms, the transcendent, the sacred, and the deeply mysterious. And I begin that part with a piece of qualitative research to ground the ineffable in the day-to-day experience of contemporary practitioners. So tonight, I'm going to begin by talking about soul, then spirit and chakras. And finally, I'll say a bit about the research project, which I did for the book, which some of you took part in. Well, 5 of you, Deja, anyway. I don't know if you'll recognise your answers, but 5 of you were there anyway. So soul. Listening to the call of the soul and spirit is our quintessential task in life, to me. Learning to distinguish between the different calls on our attention isn't easy, and that's the challenge we're constantly set in life. We often ask ourselves, is this intuition? Is it fear? Is it anxiety or paranoia? Or is this the call of my soul? Individuation is about aligning with your soul, searching to find your purpose. Addictive thinking or obsessions or desires to conform or please can be quite compelling and convince you that you're following the right path. Hormones exert great influence. Responsibilities abound. Families make demands. All of these and more make listening to the sometimes quiet insistence of the soul's beckoning quite a challenge. We might attune to this beat through dreams or synchronicities. Dreams are for some the only connection to life beyond the diurnal realm, which makes that connection so vital and meaningful. A synchronicity can land in a flash that's impossible to ignore and brings a sense of what's meant, a sense of being guided, perhaps. And the trick is to pick up on that track and follow it. The more aligned with your heart and soul you are, the more rooted in your body and instincts you are, the lighter your step, the easier it becomes to follow that call. Of course, following your own star is never easy and can never be easy. Mythologist and storyteller Michael Mead recounts a wonderful tale of a man called Isaac being called by a dream 3 times, which tells him to travel to a distant city where he'll find great treasures at the foot of a bridge. Finally, after the 3rd dream, he can resist the call no longer, but feels foolish and inhibited from digging for the treasure, as there are guards on the bridge. But after days of pacing up and down, one of the guards approaches Isaac and asks if he's all right. So Isaac kind of swallows down his vulnerability and feels quite foolish and embarrassed about taking a dream seriously. And he tells the guard why he's there. And the guard says to him, he agrees, it is really silly to listen to a dream. And then he tells Isaac that he himself had a dream the previous night, where a man called Isaac is told to return home and look behind the loose bricks of his hearth, where he'll discover a great quantity of gold. And after writing that, I came across another version of that story, exactly the same story, in Germany, where a man finds a copper strongbox full of coins under a tree. And that was in a wonderful book by a chap called Stefan Alex. You'll find the reference to that in the back of the book when you read it, but it's a wonderful book. So soul is at the very heart of depth encounters in life. Can we go to the PowerPoint page? I forgot about that. So the green share screen thing.
That's what I'm, yeah.
That's it.
Come on.
There we go.
What do I do to now?
The
Screen?
the one underneath, that's it, yeah. Click on that. And then
That's just showing the screen. One of them says it's the bottom left-hand corner.
Bottom right hand
Bottom
left.
There.
I can't see.
Yes, I think it is.
Yeah, it says soul and spirit in them now.
It just doesn't seem to.
It's now you press share, which is the bottom right-hand corner.
Share.
There.
Sorry about this, folks.
Yeah, brilliant.
And then because I do it all the time.
And then
the little box, make it big.
where's
The top right-hand corner.
hey?
Would you like to do it?
There's the expert. That's it. And then the top
So
left.
you want- Step from beginning.
Oh, there we are.
Are you still there, Zoom?
I'm sure they are.
There. Yeah, they're still
Yeah.
beginning.
Can we flip to the next one? So, well, the preface to that is that soul is at the very heart of depth encounters in life. We may not use that language, but we sure recognize that when we experience it. And this is a slide from Marion Woodman, where she says we all experience soul moments in life. When we see a magnificent sunrise, hear the call of the loon, see the wrinkles on our mother's hands, or smell the sweetness of a baby. During these moments, our body, as well as our brain, resonates as we experience the glory of being a human being. Most of us long for a soul mate, although that term has become so cliched. The company of those with whom we feel such a close affinity is beyond measure and makes life feel fully lived and valuable. We feel understood and recognized when we resonate with each other's souls. In classical antiquity, souls are seen as already connected in the world soul or anima mundi. So perhaps it's no wonder we feel something move when we meet a fellow traveller whose soul touches ours. Writing in 1964, James Hillman noted that soul is not a scientific term, and it appears very rarely in psychology today, he says, and then usually with inverted commas, as if it to keep it from infecting its scientifically sterile surroundings. I'm not sure that much has changed in straight psychology in the decades since Hillman wrote those words. But in analytical psychology, soul is at the forefront of our explorations, and this paper seeks to draw that out. Hillman, the preeminent writer in this field on the subject of soul, goes on to play with the idea that alongside a case history, analysts might take a soul history when first meeting with a patient. He says, case history reports, thank you, Liz, on the achievements and failures of life with the world of facts. But the soul has neither achieved nor failed in the same way. Its material is experience, and its realizations are accomplished not just by efforts of will. The soul imagines and plays. Taking a soul history means capturing emotions, fantasies, and images by entering into the game and dreaming the myth along with the patient. Taking a soul history means becoming a part of the other person's fate. Soul's facts are symbols and paradoxes. Psyche and soul are used interchangeably in Jungian discourse. And soul for Jung was the very essence of relationship. So a good deal of his mature work is concerned with soul. And of course, psychotherapist means healer of souls, which is in stark contrast to the current political moves based on financial expediency to turn state-provided therapy in the NHS in this country into a manualized practice, sometimes even excluding the presence of an individual altogether and using a computer program. Nothing could be further from the actual origins of what true psychotherapy is about when two individuals meet together in a room. And the very morning when I was writing that, there was a radio report on Radio 4 that the British Medical Association had published research showing the results of working with a computerized therapist and a cognitive-based human therapist were indistinguishable. I mean, I just, just sigh when I hear nonsense like that. But this, alas, is the class apartheid that's been created, whereby those with few financial resources are left to take this scrap from the table, while the middle classes who can afford it are able to access proper therapy from a practitioner and a modality of their choosing. Again, nothing could be further from the origins of the meeting of two individual souls in the service of healing. And it's not that just this is not a good situation, but to me, it's damaging to the soul. Excuse me a sec.
Sorry to interrupt. The slides aren't changing for those of us on Zoom.
Oh dear.
They're not being moved forward.
Oh, I don't know how we would do that. Or how it's not doing that wrong.
Sorry.
But nobody's missed anything because you were reading
Yeah.
the slide.
It's just an added focus.
Reading kids, is that one?
That's probably the last one, I think.
Number 4, isn't it?
Occurrence.
Case history.
Can you see that, people?
Can you see? Can you hear us?
Yes.
you
Can't,
see-
but we can't see the slides.
Oh dear.
We could see them, but when you were adjusting it just now, it's
I wonder if it
Oh,
needs
that's
to be
shared
left online,
on our shared screen. Yeah.
because we should be able to see the people on the screen at the same time as well.
Normally, yes.
I don't.
Where's the-
Well, there's only a couple, so maybe forget the slides.
So you are reading
You are reading them. aren't you?
actually the
Yes,
text
yes.
that's on the slide.
Yeah.
Which one is it for?
No, We're on.
Recipients can only see your application. Can you see that?
Yes, we can. It's great. Thanks.
Thank you, thank you.
Sorry,
Fine.
you just got stuck.
Oh, thanks, Dale. Thank you. Uh,
Thank you.
So, both soul and spirit go, well, I said beyond sexuality, that's probably not the right word, but they may both be experienced as an aspect of sexuality, as well as more broadly, as the deepest layers of our being. When our souls or spirits meet in sexual congress, the greatest depths or heights are encountered. Tantric practice is a way of developing these depths of intimacy, and I'll be talking more about that in more detail elsewhere in the autumn. Soul might be experienced like a bass note, spirit like an ethereal tone, and the arc of the journey of the soul is slow, discernible over years, whereas spirit can move like lightning, not always, but can. Soul is connected to earth and water, which links us or roots us, you might say, to the earth, creating a channel to receive the healing energy which comes up from Gaia. Soul connects us through our bodies to the Kathant levels. Spirit is connected to fire and earth. It metaphorically takes us up. Our spirit rises, transcending the diurnal realm.
Next one.
That's it, yeah. You might say that soul is like a membrane that links the physical world to the spirit. It gives us access on the physical plane to spiritual experience. And the next bit is about spirit. For Jung, as for me, spirit is not a concept, but rather an empirical phenomenon which may be experienced by anyone and everyone. When I refer to spirit, I'm referring to the spiritual aspect of ourselves. I'm referring to the transcendent dimension of existence rather than paranormal spirits, which is the subject of a different chapter in my book, which we're not touching on tonight. Spirit is seen as the energizing element in creativity, whereby you might feel as if the words are writing themselves, or the painting is painting itself. The Newman or the uplifting nature of a work of art may be experienced as spiritual. And as most people here will know, Jung wrote a whole volume on the spirit of man in art and literature, which includes essays on Picasso and Ulysses. This is not to say simply these works were inspired by spirit, as much as moved or animated by spirit. An example of this might be when I'm writing, I'll sometimes wake with words going through my mind, which I dash to catch as I wake, as they're often nuggets of gold, which were not in my conscious awareness, any more than a dream image I might waken to remember. And these moments are precious and fleeting. In my first book, In the Basics, I cite various examples of artworks and scientific findings having been dreamt, such as lots of famous examples, like Paul McCartney dreaming his song Yesterday, which he describes as magic, the experience of waking to it. And there are copious examples of inspiration having arrived via a dream, which feels as if it's a gift from God or from the other side, or you'll interpret that through the lens of your own belief system and may have other ideas about the source. But however you conceptualize such experiences, they leave an indelible impression and are experienced as precious. It's to spirit that we aim our prayers, and perhaps how we experience our prayers being answered. Although that may, of course, not be directly in the way we wished. Spirit has the greater wisdom beyond our perspective as to what we might need. For those interested in looking into Jung's perspective on spirit academically, a journal article has appeared by a Danish practitioner which looks at the development of Jung's use of the term across his lifetime and which incorporates a broad spectrum of views. Gitz Johansson is the chap who wrote it, and he discusses Jung's Spirit of the Times and Spirit of the Depths, which Jung describes in the Red Book. But these may be seen as complexes which lead Jung or connect him to the world of soul. Jung used this way of referring to the spirit of the times and of the depths to elaborate his own thinking about the world of soul and spirit as he experienced it. They certainly have a numinous quality and operate at a deep level, but may be distinct from what I refer to as the spiritual dimension of life, which is seen as the divine spark of life, which animates us all and which some call God. And I'm not referring to a supernatural God who resides somewhere up or out there, but to an energy which is omnipresent, meaning both out and most specifically inside of each of us, at a level at which frankly inside and outside have no meaning. This is what alchemists refer to as quinta essentia, the quintessence of our very nature, which is different to what Jung refers to as the spirit of the times and spirit of the depths, which might be thought of as God images or images of the gods in a metaphorical or mythological sense. Another way of looking at that might be that archetypes may carry the message of spirit in the sense that the right people may appear at the right time, or archetypal characters in myth and fairy tale carrying the salient message which is needed in order to get on the right path may arrive, for instance. Jung saw spirit along these lines when he characterized spirit as fragments of the psyche. However, they don't need to remain split off and can be married within the overarching psyche. This is the ultimate work which culminated in Jung's mature opus on alchemy. These facets of life need to be incorporated in order for us to become more whole and connected to our fullest potential as humans, not just for ourselves as individuals, but for the healing of the world too. We can all witness the consequences of narcissistic self-absorption in the world around us if soul and spirit are left out of the equation. Not mentioning any names, but I think you might have your own ideas who I was thinking of.
Can't imagine.
Yes, right. So chakras is the next section. If you think in chakras, soul relates to the root or base chakra, known as Muladhara in Sanskrit. It's located around the perineum and is associated with the color red, while the crown chakra is associated with the colors violet or white, and is the door to spirit, the divine light, which is seen as the source. And spirit is accessed through the brown chakra, which is also known in some as well, known as the third eye, which I'm sure everyone's familiar with. Chakras are the energy centers which connect our physical bodies with the spiritual realm via a kind of aura, like the membrane I mentioned earlier. There are 7 basic chakras, although some systems break them down into more, each associated with different parts of the mind and body. And in this table, I set out the 7 chakras alongside the aspects they're associated with. Can everybody see those? Everyone's on mute now, so.
Yes.
No, we
Well,
can't see them.
you
Oh, I
can't see
can't.
No,
No.
we're still back at the first one.
Oh,
Maybe it's doing the
hold on a sec.
changing the-
Well, not the first one, but it hasn't moved since.
Oh, strange.
Some people do that.
How's that?
Yeah,
Got it now.
yeah, we've
Oh,
got it
lovely,
now.
thank you.
If I use sick, you can move them on.
Oh, Tuesday. That might even be the last one, actually. I'm not sure.
There's another one.
So anyway, I've listed them top to bottom to mirror the physical locality to which they're linked, although they usually display the other way up, in line with the flow of energy which rises up from the root chakra. And that energy is known in India as prana and in China as ji. And that flow of energy is represented par excellence in Kundalini, where the energy of the snake is seen as rising up through the body from the root chakra and climaxes in rising through the crown up to the spiritual heights and awakening. Each chakra is even linked to an endocrine organ. So many different ways of looking at them. But attuning to chakras can be helpful to locate the locus of a physical or emotional issue or discomfort, which can then be attended to either through self-practice or with or by a healer. The system of acupuncture, for instance, is based partly on chakra energy centers. In Taoist practice, the chakras are also described as the trunk of Tao. In this model, the sexual center is also seen as the spiritual center, which reveres sexuality as sacred. There's a recent book translated from Japanese by somebody called Shiga, which is based on his deep study of the Tao Te Ching, an ancient sacred treatise written by an older contemporary of Confucius. And I can't recommend this highly enough. It's absolutely wonderful. In Shiga's travels in China, he met a holy man named Mr. M. And Shiga discovered that, in fact, the Tao Te Ching is written in a code using what he called shikuji, which are the letters. And they replace the original letters because they have the same sound, but a different meaning. And the translation using this kind of dual meaning revealed a deeply sacred sexual meaning to the esoteric text. A practice Shiga discovered is called yama, which equates to yoga, with its links to Kundalini and Tantra, which he describes in a very inspiring way. And he encountered this practice in a remote village in China, where he experienced what he called a oneness on earth. This is the goal, although that's much too concrete, material a world for what he's talking about, of all spiritual practice. He recounts a harmony in the villages he discovered, which is all too distant from the lived experience of much of our lives in sophisticated, advanced so-called Western economies. Shiga describes his wonder at what he witnessed in the remote village. This is actually another slide, please. And he says their marital lives were not controlled by laws or government. According to the conditions, there seemed to be many patterns of marriage, such as one husband with some wives, one woman with some men, a night visitation marriage, and so on, all based on one husband with one wife. To my surprise, even though several patterns of marriage existed freely, he says, a perfect balance was kept as a whole. The whole of the relationship between males and females in this village created such a perfect harmony, as if all were united into one complicated organic existence. It was as if all people were lovers who understood each other, and no jealousy was felt because of physical contact with the opposite sex. It was because they didn't have a personal desire to seek for the opposite sex within their psyche, where they are satisfied with the great Tao. It was the same toward other living beings, he says. It was impossible to monopolize a fortune, and they didn't have a concept of fortune itself. After that experience, he says, I came to marvelously understand the mental state in which people are so hungry for money or power. The desire by civilized people for tangible things is a compensation for lack of love, he says. We've confused the spiritual world and the material world in our psyches.
So we haven't got that here, have we?
I
No.
think you have to.
Yeah, I've got it.
Okay,
But we haven't.
We haven't.
I don't know where that's from.
Doesn't seem you have to do both of them.
Both eyes and ears. You want this slide? Ruth?
You can't see it.
You can't see it here, Dale.
I know that. But the other people can see.
I'll send you a copy of that if you like. Yeah.
I can't do this. So,
Don't worry, no, appreciate it. Anyway, moving on to the research project. Anecdotally, I found in my practice that the majority of people seeking Jungian analysis turn to that approach because they're looking for someone who's able to work with soul and spirit, or at least who values soul and spirit. This may not always be obvious because many Jungian practitioners work with soul and spirit without ever mentioning those terms. It can be used in the most subtle of ways as it underpins much Jungian theory. And I thought it would be interesting to test my hypothesis in writing this book. So I devised a set of 10 questions which I decided to send to a broad span of Jungian analysts across the world. And I wondered whether my experience would be universal, as well as whether there would be a cultural or gendered dimension to my questions. So for the purpose of the research project, I wrote to the chairs or presidents, as they are called sometimes, of all the 69 Jungian societies of the IAAP, and asked them to circulate my survey to their members. I can't tell how many of my research questionnaires were actually forwarded to members, and language may have been a barrier in this, as I'm sorry to say I didn't think in time about getting the questionnaire translated from English, which just seems nuts now. I mean, mad. But I do know that the representative in China who replied to me very kindly translated my questionnaire, for which I'm very grateful. So it's difficult to know the percentage of replies I received, but I never intended it to be a numbers game. And the numbers involved in this research make it statistically insignificant, so I'll not be drawing any grand conclusions. By its very nature, the questions I asked were open and looking for narrative answers rather than quantitative findings. But I did receive responses from analysts in Australia, China, Germany, UK, US, Switzerland, the Netherlands, Ukraine, and Uruguay, which was fantastic. And it was interesting to see how what seemed obvious to one person seemed equally obvious in another direction altogether for others. In the questionnaire I sent out, I explained what I was doing and my purpose in writing. I told them a bit about the book and explained that all the replies would be strictly confidential, so no identifying information would be included in my write-up, except for the country of origin. And I said people could admit any question if they wished. So the last slide was just a list of the questions I asked. So I'll just skip through them since you can't read them. The first was, do you find soul and or spirit spontaneously arise in sessions? 2, if so, how long into the work have such instances arisen, stating as many variations in time as you wish? 3, if soul and spirit arise in sessions, how would you tend to deal with such matters? Do you distinguish between dealing with soul and dealing with spirit in different ways? Question 5, are you transparent about your own belief system, if you have one, when these subjects arise? Would you tend to introduce these topics into the work? That one created some interesting responses. How do you find people respond to these ideas? Do you notice any perceptible difference in responses along gender, class, or cultural lines? And finally, are there any other matters you would want to raise? So I was deliberately opaque about what I meant by soul and spirit, as I wanted everyone to respond from their own understanding and that of the people they're working with. I specifically didn't layer a religious connotation to their meaning, as that's not where I come from, although I realise that some, or perhaps even many of the analysts responding, may come from a religious tradition. I found it so interesting to read the responses. There's a wider range of views than I expected somehow. Some were kind of wide open and generous, and others quite cagey. But perhaps it's inevitable when dealing with a subject which may be such a private matter. And also, for many, most people, I'd have been a stranger asking quite personal questions. But in all cases, I'm deeply grateful to the respondents for taking time to reply and for sharing their thoughts and experiences so freely, which I hope people will find of value. It may be surprising that most of the respondents who took the time to reply do engage with spirit and soul, however defined. It may be unsurprising. I think I said surprising, unsurprising. Yeah. I was rather struck that few analysts identified a gender, class, or cultural component in whether and how soul and spirit feature in analysis. It is a difficult question. And I wasn't thinking that anyone would be more likely to experience soul or spirit than anyone else, because they're universal experiences which arise in their many different guises across all cultures and times and genders. It may be that in some cultures it's more or less acceptable to talk about these matters, I thought. And I think class is a particularly unexplored area in the literature and in trainings, which perhaps needs greater attention and which might then help us identify whether it's a factor in the work. Certainly, as I was touching on earlier, it's a factor in accessing analysis and therapy. I'm not sure how I'm doing on time, but 9 o'clock. I don't know when I'm supposed to finish, but I'll crack on until you tonight.
Before midnight.
Of course, okay. One of the biggest obstacles I noticed in responses to my survey was discomfort around what might have been seen as introducing a topic into the session. Now, I wouldn't do that myself, as I don't believe it's the analyst's place to set any kind of agenda. But there are times when identifying something as relating to soul and or spirit can be deeply meaningful and helpful. And sometimes you can palpably hear an intake of breath at times when those words are used, because often people love it. They love those things being identified. Revealing where we come from spiritually as an analyst is a big consideration. In some cases, it's publicly known through published writings. Or we may be surrounded by giveaway signs in our consulting rooms. I seem to have umpteen Buddhas and whatnots around the room, so you can see there's something that interests me. And these revelations need to be carefully calibrated, and analysts will be conscious of what they're revealing. Perhaps it partly depends on where you are in your own spiritual journey, as much as how comfortable you are about being transparent about that aspect of life. Some analysts who responded to my questionnaire sounded appalled by the idea of being candid about their beliefs, while others take it in their stride. Most, though, treat it as part of the transference relationship and as any other phenomenon that might arise in the work. Others turn these questions to Jung and refer to his position in these matters. There may be a view that whenever we discuss a dream, we're engaging with soul and or spirit. Many experience dreams as communications, not just from the unconscious, but from God or spirit, or however we might conceptualize that higher or more personal power. And not surprisingly, many folk who fall within this category would be drawn to a Jungian approach for his inclusion of the spiritual realm in his psychology. When death enters a consulting room or a synchronicity, they often evoke a numinous feeling which automatically takes us into the realm of soul and spirit. So these matters then become hard to avoid. Depth is present when we touch these topics. Do we soften in our bodies and open to the depth, or become frightened, or rigid, or maybe defensive? Or perhaps we hide behind a professional persona. It takes courage to allow ourselves to be vulnerable when entering into such unknown territory for both analyst and analysand. This creates new levels of emotional intimacy in the analysing dyad, which may need to be managed internally on both sides. In general terms, older people tend to veer towards these topics when contemplating aging, wondering if they've lived well enough, wondering about the meaning of life. Whereas younger folk come at this more often nowadays from eco concerns and thinking about the future viability of our planet. People question the values of living in a materialistic society. The neoliberal political agendas many of us have suffered in recent decades also tend to make us think more broadly about how we want to live and whether that narrow, ego-centered mentality is fulfilling in the broadest terms. People seek out therapy and analysis for many different reasons, ranging from the ordinary mundane difficulties in day-to-day life we all encounter, to deep spiritual dis-ease and being stuck in patterns which may feel karmic, intransigent, or fixed patterns that need assistance to unpick. The two are not necessarily entirely separate. I'm thinking of a patient who was doing office work for many years and felt her soul dying day by day with the daily drudge that work entailed. It took a great many years for her to dig her way out of this deadly grind to manifest her gifts and discover how it was she came to be in such a position. The reasons were deep, partly hidden for many years in family secrets, and extremely challenging to address. But she did break the chains and found a fulfilling career in a field which truly felt like her right path in life. Such work is so moving, as I'm sure everybody here knows, and can be transformational. It takes enormous courage to dig so deep, but it is possible. The end.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Liz, I've got very restricted pictures, and I think it's going to make it very difficult for me to actually chair the discussion.
If we get rid of the share screen, which Dale is.
I've
just
already
doing-
got rid of it.
Yeah,
Oh,
we haven't here yet.
hey, there we are.
I think you need to chair it, Liz, because you've got everything there.
Okay.
How's that? Can you see everybody now, Moira?
No.
Oh,
We know,
Oh.
because there's several pages, so if you,
I see, yeah.
if we could get rid of, I don't know quite how to do that.
Stop screen sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got screen sharing again. Can you put back?
We're just getting rid of it, Moira.
Okay.
We're just,
That it, can you see that?
no.
Yeah.
No. I thought that. Different on
I know.
Hey, that
the,
looks.
on the laptop than it is on the,
Hey,
Oh,
that's it.
Very good.
oh.
Let's put it bigger.
Fantastic.
Wonderful, we got you.
Thank you,
Okay,
Dale.
I don't know how you get the other people.
I've got everybody there.
Everyone can see everyone now.
No, because there'll
3, 4 pages.
there's 3 pages.
Okay.
Usually,
So if you would like to make a comment or ask a question or just somehow use your, it's best if you can use your reaction button. Because, and then, or if we don't see you, put a message in the chat.
Or
So
shout.
who,
Or shout.
No.
or you can, or wave.
See everybody.
If you shout, we won't hear you because you're all muted.
The reaction button and the
Yes,
chat
that's what-
thing
yeah,
work best.
yeah.
They immediately come up
Yeah.
on the screen.
So in spite of all the difficulties with the technology, which is just a part of life, I can see that Linda Mary's got her used her reaction button, would like to come in. Linda Mary.
Hi, Ruth. Thank you for that. I've heard you talk a little bit about it before. I think you did something online a while back. And so I recognize some of the things. And I look forward to reading your book. I wondered if you could say a little bit more about grace, what grace is, because it's, you know, it's a theological word from my point of view. I just wondered how you understand grace.
Well, it might be one of those things that we all have to find our own relationship to. Me, it's the fundamental. I mean, I don't see it as a theological term because I don't think in those terms. But to me, it's everything. That's the thing that moves and guides, teaches. One of the links I've made is that that's how I see mantic practices working. That's how it happens. And I did raise what I think is some really interesting questions at the end, actually, which I could regale you with if I can find it. Right at the end, where hold on. Yes. I say that a fair question might be raised about bad things that happen in life, because you wouldn't normally think about them as being a manifestation of grace. And so I say, well, where do they come from? Are they manifestations of grace? If you think about the idea of us all having tasks in life and ways to learn, which is one of the things I touch on about destiny and fate. Do these bad things have to happen? Is that to do with grace? Can a bad thing happen by grace? And I don't mean that with any connotation of punishment or sin. Can anything that happen that doesn't have the blessing of grace? Can man's shadow, either personal or collective, override grace? So lots of questions to ponder on.
Thank you, Ruth.
I think Graham, did you want to come in? You need to unmute.
Yeah,
Graham.
yes, thank you. Yes, just responding to that. Thank you again, Ruth, for a very thought-provoking presentation. I shall look forward to reading the book. But I was also going to ask, or to extend the question: are these things necessarily bad?
What, bad?
Well,
You mean when something happens that we experience as bad?
bad things, so-called bad things, are they necessarily bad, or might they be an expression of grace?
Yes, exactly.
And I'm thinking about Jung's idea of God, and God as I can't remember where it is, but it's in one of his books where he talks about God as everything that crosses our path. And so he moves away from a traditional Christian monotheistic position to a much more fluid position, which takes into account the dark.
Yes.
Thank you.
Can I just remind you of your quote? And I've probably got it wrong.
What was the quote?
But it's the Zen saying, there are no obstacles on the path.
Yes.
The obstacle is the path.
Yes, yes. Yes, exactly.
I really, that stood out for me in your book,
Mm.
unquote. I think that's refers to what you're saying. Great.
I mean, things often feel absolutely terrible. And you just don't know, is the perspective. We have to find a way of having a perspective that comes to a place where you can actually, where you might be able to see it as something that was really helpful, that maybe needed to happen.
We only need to see that later.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm articulating is how a seemingly bad or even evil feeling experience, and that it can ultimately serve our individuation or personal growth, but it can be hell at the time.
Indeed.
It raises a lot of existential questions, doesn't it? About good and evil.
Yeah.
And evil not just being absence of good. I mean, would you think of, for example, the Holocaust or torture being manifestations of grace?
No, I would not. No.
Well, why not?
No.
In terms of good and evil, you know, this is a question that this raises. I certainly would, but then I don't really understand grace.
The thing is,
I don't understand the theology of it.
Yeah.
But I can't see those things as something that is helping us along our path.
I'm not making a global statement when I'm saying that sometimes perspective allows us to see something crappy as being helpful. Certainly not, because
Well, that's a completely different question to me. In other words, how do you manage to live with something which may be extremely difficult or painful, that might lead to growth, for example, or to greater understanding? And if you're never faced with any obstacles, how can you grow?
Absolutely.
But these seem to be different questions, and than what you were saying about, well, all of these things can be, you know, I can't see them as being manifestations of grace.
I certainly don't see the
Right,
Holocaust as a
okay.
manifestation.
I think
of grace.
Thea has her hand, would like to go. Thea, would you like to come in?
Yes, I was just wondering whether, in order, coming off the subject slightly, in order for the obstacle to be seen in a positive way, does the patient need to believe that could be the case? In other words, do you have to believe that an obstacle could be something good in order to experience it at some level as perhaps going to be something good?
I don't know, Thea, because you don't feel that in the moment when something awful's going on, do you?
No, but in order to see, yeah, but if we want to promote perhaps an idea that if somebody's extremely upset and somehow you want to comfort them, I'm not talking about patients now, I'm talking in general, you want to comfort them, it would only be a comfort if the other person believed that something good could come out of it. And I call it this Jungian optimism, which I find very annoying at times, but that's a personal thing. There's you know, everything could be good and nice and it'll all be fine in the end.
I fear I've been misunderstood, or because
no, I'm not saying it to you, Ruth. I'm asking the question in general. I'm not challenging what you're saying. I just want to know whether you need to believe this. One needs to believe.
It's fine to challenge what I'm saying, Thea, but I certainly don't have that kind of Pollyanna outlook. I don't think anyone who knows me would think that.
No. I'm not asking you personally, Ruth. I'm just putting it out there as this, do we need to believe that there could be a good outcome in order for us to be able to see that there is one?
Well, hope is a kind of important ingredient in life, isn't it?
Yeah. Hope is probably better than, hope. Do you have to have that hope to start with?
Well, sometimes it's all you've got, and you
Yeah.
you might not even have that. But
Yeah.
we don't know the way things are going to pan out.
No, I understand that. Anyway, maybe my question's not making much sense, sorry.
Well, there's
Liz-
two people.
Liz,
sorry,
Arthur's got his hand up.
yes, Arthur and then Andrew.
Yeah.
In a recent article, I think last year, the German analyst Gustav Bovensiepen, who probably quite a good number of you know, he wrote an article on evil and stated that Jungians don't really have a good theory, a good concept of evil. We have the shadow, but then the shadow has to be integrated. So it's somehow a bit minimized. Now, he doesn't have an answer and a concept of his own, but he raises the issue. And I think that is an important point, that maybe it's something that Jungians do need to do some work on. And I remember that in my own training all those years ago in the 1980s in Stuttgart, one of the seminar leaders raised the question, are there fairy tales with negative outcomes? I hope to meet him next weekend and ask if he still can remember which ones they were. I can't. I unfortunately destroyed my notes of the time. So yeah, I think there is an issue. Very briefly to the concept of grace. To me, that is something that is not necessarily in a religious context, but you know, just things like that I'm born in a rich country, that I'm born to the kind of parents I've had, things where I have something that I really haven't actually earned or deserved in any way. To me, that is grace, and all I can do is being grateful for and share it.
Arthur, Andrew, do you want to come in?
Yes. Ruth, it was a lovely, thoughtful paper, and it's a lovely, thoughtful book, which I have had the chance to read. I've got to do a seminar with the Asia candidates next week on spirituality. Bloody hell. Do you want to do it for me or with me? Anyway, in the seminar, I'm going to talk about something I call the shadow of spirituality, and I would very much like your comments on it. Of course, shadow doesn't equate with the whole thing. These are just shadow aspects. The first one is that spirituality seems to lend itself to a kind of elitism.
Yes.
I know something you don't.
Yeah.
Worse, we know something you don't. And we are therefore special and superior to you, who is somehow behind us. So there's elitism. Elitism is a shadow. Then another one, although this is being challenged, especially from eco-spirituality and spiritual feminism, nevertheless, I still think it's the shadow of a lot of spiritual themes, and that is indifference to personal suffering. So that the higher issue of grace or whatever takes precedence over the ordinary down to earth. And the third one is something to do with cults and leaders of cults. There's a quite considerable psychoanalytic literature now about spiritual abuse in cults. And indeed, Jung has been accused of it absurdly, but nevertheless, we can never forget it. So I just wondering about the shadow element, elitism, indifference to human suffering, although, as I say, I think this is being seriously challenged. And lastly, the track record of contemporary spiritual movements isn't that great. Anyway, I would just like you to give me some things I can say when I get to that part of
Well, the first bit I cover in the introduction, where I talk about how I first came to be in therapy, where I was in a spiritual community and it was all nicey, and nobody had any idea how to deal with the difficult aspects of life, including me, of course. And so then I found that I needed to go into therapy, and of course, you know, massive change, well, not change of path. I mean, it didn't change my path, but it meant incorporating all of that. So I quite agree that's a very important aspect that can be a real problem. And people want things to be nice and bright and shiny. And of course, life's not like that. What was the second bit? The second bit was
the second bit was indifference to human suffering, but I'd like to reply to what you said about the first one.
Go on then.
Well, my point was not the nicey Pollyanna stuff. My point was the feeling of superiority, the elitism that can.
The fact is that it's not an elite, because anyone and everyone can experience it. That's life. And of course, not everybody is interested or wants to focus their time in that direction. But I don't see it in any way as elitist, because it's in the air we breathe.
Well, of course you don't, and I don't. But surely it's apparent that there can be a sort of elitism or superiority or better than you, I know more than you, I'm deeper than you, that can get into it. Yes, that's what I'm talking about. Shadow, actually, not substance.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's obnoxious. Yeah.
And can I ask you why in our times have so many spiritual movements, groups, organizations ended up with either sexual abuse or financial exploitation or something horrid like this? What is there in fact a shadow? That's what I'm really asking you to.
Well, when the dark side is ignored, it will come out.
Yeah, that's a good reply. Yeah.
I also think there's something about narcissism in there as well, because I'm thinking about a vicar in Yorkshire who created a very modern church, and he called it the 9 o'clock service, and he became the object of veneration by so many of his congregation, and subsequently was discovered to have sexually abused a number of the young women in the congregation.
Well, it's true of many churches.
And many religious groups.
Many religious groups, absolutely.
There are a couple of people who are waiting to ask questions.
Oh, please, I can't see.
Yes,
I think
Lindsay and then Richard.
Oh, Ruth, that's lovely talk. Thank you very much. And I look forward to reading your book. I wonder if you say anything in the book about anima and soul and the connection to the feminine, because I tend to think of the soul as being something to do with the feminine, whereas the masculine animus, something to do with the with and masculinity. Yeah. I don't mean men and women, of course, but I wonder whether you raise that at all in your book.
Absolutely not. No.
Oh, right. Okay. Thanks.
Richard, and then Angie, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. I bought the book already, so you have to sign it next time I see you. And you don't mention your brilliant last bit on principles of Jewish Buddhism, which actually made me laugh out loud. I'd love to read them out, but I won't. But there's something important, isn't it, about the connection between humor as grace and evidence of grace and gracefulness. Where it's possible even in really dark places, and of course Jewish humor is almost, you know, unsurpassable in that. But that's not the point I wanted to make, because something really fell very with gravity in a really helpful way when you said that one of the contemporary problems is the confusion with the spiritual and the material world.
Yes.
And of course, one of the things that people are talking about is, you know, kind of sex and money and power emerging, I think, in that state of confusion of spirit and matter. So it gets very kind of, you know, matter really does take on spirit's shadow. But to go to the question of elitism and class, I'm really struck in my own practice how actually it's amongst quite a number of working class folk that spirit and soul are coming very overtly into the work.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's often because, you know, those who aren't privileged are able best of all to see through materialism.
That's very
and I think there's
interesting.
something there about a space for spirit and soul. And I don't know, I'd love you to say a bit more about, you know, the confusion of the spiritual and the material, but I wonder also about the kind of class dimension, because that's just my experience.
Well, people just look in the wrong place, don't they? And of course, society is set up that way, thinking shiny things. Fame is going to make us happy. I mean, it's just nuts, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just making us face completely in the wrong direction.
Yeah. And I think those who are financially excluded actually see that and feel it, that's all pretty vain and empty. And that meaning actually is in other places.
Yeah. Thanks, Richard.
Angie, did you want to come in? Can you unmute?
I was just thinking about what Andrew was saying, because it was lovely and positive till Andrew brought in the shadow, and I was thinking about a Netflix documentary I watched this afternoon called Our Father, where a GP artificially inseminated his own semen into women who were coming to him for fertility treatment, and they're up to 99 children he had so far, and how perverted he was in his religious sect, and I was just thinking it's the complete opposite of what Ruth has been saying about what soul is and individuating, because it's not connecting with your shadow, not integrating your shadow, denying your shadow, and not being in relationship with your whole self, which is what individuation is supposed to achieve. And it's always going to be there, isn't it? Good and evil, you can't get away from it. That's what I wanted to say.
Can I just say something as well? I don't know how many of you have seen Women Talking, which is a very recent film, but that's again exposing cult and the power of cult and what can happen to people's minds in the when they're caught within a cult. So I was just thinking, Andrew, I think it's a real hot potato, that one, if people were to seize it. Yeah, anyway.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
there anyone else? I can't see any hands up, but I can only see, I haven't got everybody on screen, so.
I can't see anybody, Liz, but I can't see everybody.
Jack has got a hand up here.
I forgot this event entirely, but it came to me, and I'm not quite sure if it is connected to what people have said, but it is connected to grace. About 10 years ago, maybe 12, I was in Brighton, and there was a bus I wanted to get on to get into the city. And it was really full, lots of kids, noise, squabbling, and this woman with a double buggy, 2 kids in it, wanted to get on the bus. And this is before the leaning bus, you know, the one that stoops so that you can get onto it more easily. Well, that didn't exist. So there was a problem of her getting on the bus. The bus driver, I don't think this was legal, put the brakes on, got out of his little cabin, asked the lady to bring each of the 2 children to him, because he'll be sitting on the chair. He held them.
What?
Somebody else folded the buggy in half, carried that on board. Then came the lady. Then the children got transposed back onto their double trolley. She paid, and the bus went on its way. And the whole mood on the lower portion of the bus
Lovely.
just changed. Yeah.
Wouldn't happen in London, would it?
Well, that was an example of grace. And you know where to look for it. You find it. Or if you let yourself look for it, you find it.
That looks like it, doesn't it?
Moira, is anybody, can you see
I can't,
anybody?
I can't see anybody else.
So over to you, Moira.
Yes, well, what I'm thinking is that I hope that Ruth's talk will actually have encouraged all of us to want to read her book. Certainly, certainly encouraged me. And I think I shall find it quite challenging. And I'm kind of almost in awe of her mind and the grasp she has of so many things. But I want to thank you, Ruth, for doing this tonight, and hope it won't be too long before we hear you again, and hope that the sale of the book goes well.
Thank you so much.
You know, some of us might recommend to other people that they might be interested in the book.
Thank you very much.
So, you know, we've had a large number here tonight. There's whoever's in the room with you, and you know, we started with 44. We didn't quite end with 44 because you know how people drop off.
Exactly, that always happens.
Different time zones, but you know, we started with 44 people externally. And there's just a message here from Arthur saying, "Thank you, Ruth. I've just bought your book."
Yay! Kindle version.
So, okay, all the best with it, and thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ruth.
Thank you.
There's a message there's several messages from people
Oh,
actually.
I'm not seeing.
There was one from Mary Jane Rust and one from Amanda Holm.
Are we going to lose them because I can't see them?
Yes, I think we will lose them.
The messages. If you
Yeah.
click onto chat, you should get them. shouldn't you?
Yes, if you go onto the chat, you'll get them.
I think what you're saying about grace is,
Yes. Sorry.
How do you do?
if you're
Is it going to chat there? Yeah. There you are. They're up there, Mark.
Oh,
Yeah.
I can't see. them.
After
How do
was
I-
saying about his
What
grace,
do you-
is
it'll read-
all into this
Probably
family.
it's
So
not.
I think it's the same. Yeah. You can screw, you can
Maybe on the-
cases. You know, you screw up and down.
So I have to say goodbye to everybody on Zoom. It's a bit late now because everybody's gone. But goodbye. And it's
Okay, bye.
Wave there, don't-
Yeah, wait.
Is there?
Oh,
lovely.
This is new.
No, 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 no.
I don't think it's.
No, no.
Leave early. Down.
Shadow.
Oh, really, really engaging.
That's great.
Well done.
Very good.
Yeah.